I would like to invite the panelists to please kindly turn on their videos. So Kathleen Delaney, the Chief Marketing Officer of Kofax, Mary Tetlow, the Chief Brand Officer of UiPath, Nancy Hauge, the Chief Human Resource Officer of Automation Anywhere, Nellie Thompson, the Chief People Officer of Nintex, and Aarti Swamy, Executive Director, App and Infra Modernization from JPMorgan Chase. Welcome, ladies. I'm really excited about this panel. I think we are still missing one person. I don't think Kathleen is on yet.
No, I'm here.
Here.
She here?
Oh, I'm unable to see her yet.
I know, and it won't let me, it's saying you guys have stopped my video, so it won't let me start my video because it's the host has, there we go. I just got the question, so. Right, am I on? Ta-da!
Yes, you are. So I think when we were doing this prep bunch and everybody else were just saying it's going to be a very exciting panel, and I agree. I think there's a lot of energy in the room, a lot of experience here, and I'm very excited of what we're going to be discussing and sharing. I think one thing, and I think it was a great session just before this, a lot of interesting points, but one thing that came out through every single speaker was the fact that automation is a business problem and not just a technology problem. And the role of women in being able to drive business outcomes is undeniable. So before we start this session, I just want to quickly share some metrics so that we are creating that as the foundation. Executive teams that have highly gender diverse teams are found to be 21% more likely to outperform in profitability. Diverse companies are significantly better positioned, 70% more, to capture new markets. So now we know why women are needed in automation, because we're going to be helping the business sides of the problem. So very excited to have you all here. And we have a series of things that we're going to be talking about. But before we start, I just wanted to spend a little time and ask you all the same question so that you can set the stage about your background, where you've come from, and why this is so important at this point in time, at this stage in your careers, right? And I'll start with you, Kathleen, and the question that I ask is, what conscious choices or serendipitous accidents have led you to be in a leadership role in a nascent technology like automation? And what has motivated you to lead a charge in this field?
Yeah, so, I think serendipitously, 100 years ago, I was working for AT&T and had a rotation through Bell Labs. And it was just, I was a newly minted MBA. I came out of school and there was some great projects going on that they needed just business acumen around. Honestly, they just needed somebody with some common sense. So, it was fortunate that I was able to do that rotation. And once I landed there, it was like the angels sang. I had found my home and I knew what I really, really liked there. And it was the first time, I was very young in my career, but it was the first time I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like this engages my brain at a different level than what I was doing before. And that's really how I've landed where I am now, frankly.
Great. I love that. The angel singing just needed a little bit of common sense. That's a great way to position it. Mary, I'll ask you next. What brought you to the point that you are at?
Yeah, it was a circuitous path. I could make it sound like it was all planned out, but it wasn't. I was a history of art major in college, and because I loved sort of how ideas and cultures sort of meld, and they're explained and you understand them through the art and the art through the ages in these cultures. And I love that. And so when I got out of school, I was working for an architectural firm, like business development for them. And I thought, I think I'll have more opportunities if I get an MBA. And I did. But I worked on Madison Avenue for 20 years. Doing this thing, which is still, it's a generalist job. It's understanding sort of people's motivations, what people need, what their challenges are, what they need and they don't even know, and how to position a product or a service so that the benefit is obvious to the target audience. I wound up in technology through the agency I was working. I wound up at SAP and then wound up doing sort of fast growth software marketing jobs. I'm not an engineer, but I do have a talent for basically business people are people too. And really, if most business people aren't engineers or technologists, and they need to understand the value proposition in a way that how is this going to help me? And so that's how I wound up. And I wound up at UiPath purely because if you had told me 20 years ago that I would be in automation, I would have gone, robotic process automation, robots. I would have just laughed my head off. But our CEO is, he's just magnetic, and we met, and he really wanted what I do, which is brand, which is create sort of create the tribe that sort of fits with what we do. So it's been a really great path for me.
That's wonderful. I love the way you call it, creating a tribe. So I think we're here also to talk about how to create a tribe of women or allies as well, so that we can push this whole gender narrative ahead. Thank you so much for that, Mary. Aarti, would love to hear from you how you got here as well.
It's a combination of Kathleen and Mary. So when I look back 19 years, right, in this journey, I did my master's in biochemistry. I would have never, ever thought in a million years that I would be doing a programming, and I would start my career as a developer. But, I had to pay the rent, and that's how that's the path I chose. And I think, Mary, you mentioned about SAP. So yeah, that's where I basically started doing my programming, learning SAP. And then I was really great. I didn't even realize biochemistry versus programming. I mean, you do need analytical skills, right? So I discovered that this is something I truly love. So I made the choice of moving away from biochemistry to technology. And then I didn't really have any serendipitous accidents, Nitika. All the choices I made were very conscious. I think one thing I did was hard work. You can't escape and bypass that. And as I learned also is say yes to life, right? Just say yes. Because we as women, we kind of always self-doubt ourselves, right? We kind of know whether do we have everything that we need? And that one thing I have learned hard way, that just take the chance. And I still remember a few years back walking into an office of my ex-boss and basically hiring myself. He was building up an organization from ground up in technology. And I basically said, you should create this special role. And that role, I will basically have that role. And this is how I'm going to help you to succeed, you and the firm, right? So many times, it was nerve-wracking. How did I even do that, right? So going through that process, so saying yes to life, real hard work, and just changing. I changed my roles quite often. Once I understood that being in one role is not going to make me where I am today. And taking that risk and, learning a lot. And then at this stage of my career, I really feel like I want to make sure that the junior females out there, or even men, that I give back, I share my experience, my failures, and I still have a long way to go. So.
Absolutely. Fantastically said. So say yes to life, take micro risks and chances, and keep learning, right? I think those are really good points that you talked about. Nancy, I know when we spoke, you had a very interesting way of introducing yourself. And you are a stand-up comic as well. Would love to hear a little bit about how you got involved with the space.
So yes, I have an entirely serendipitous life. I did start out as a comedy writer and a stand-up comic, and did improv at Second City. Married my husband, who was an actor and singer at the time. He's a composer today. And we were starving artists together in New York. And ultimately, someone had to get a real job, and I lost the coin toss, which is fine. He's far more gifted than I am. And I fell into technology because he was offered 12 weeks of work singing all the jingles for a place called Marriott's Great America in Santa Clara, California. And I came out here in 1983. I knew nothing about technology. I went to work for a company that said it made workstations, which I thought was office furniture, like Hay cubicles. It ended up to be Sun Microsystems. And that, and again, very much like Kathleen said, I ended up in this environment where they were inviting me to bring everything to work, right? They said, first, bring that intellect. That's great. You're smart. We love that. And then, oh, you're funny. That's great. We were really enjoying the sense of humor. And they ultimately got to, you could bring your gender too, because, we actually have customers who are women. So yeah, bring that on in. So that was kind of the beginning of my career. Interestingly enough, so, how I ended up at Automation Anywhere is interesting to me, at least. I got a call from a woman who sits on the board, Kathleen, and she said, I had met the CEO a couple of years earlier, she'd introduced us just for over tea one day, give him a little advice. And she called me up exactly 4 years ago this week. She called and said, look, Mihir would like to hire a CHRO. And I think if you'll come in and turn down the job, then he'll go look for somebody. But, could you just come in and talk to him and turn it down? And it's interesting, though. Mihir really captured me because he said, Nancy, what do you think the role of human resources will be when 30% of the workforce isn't human? And I thought, boy, if there's something in my career that I'd actually like to solve, answer, change before, because I'm 117 years old, before I leave, that's probably what I'd like to do. Now, the really cute part of this story is that Kathleen Holmgren was my first new grad hire in 1984 at Sun Microsystems. And so it's kind of evidence that the old girls network exists, but we are now really old girls. So.
Oh, I think that was lovely. I think you have a very charming way of describing your life, and it really has been serendipitous. And I think very good food for conversation as we talk about the whole displacement of labor. And I think it was talked about even earlier, but Param alluded to it, but would love to have that conversation as we go along. Nellie, I would love to understand a little bit about your role and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy to be here and with this amazing group of women. I also am appreciative just to put some care on this topic and a bit of a lens. So my start in tech and HR happened at the same time, and it was very linear from there on out. But to step into it, it really was, frankly, an accident. As an HR intern in a company that I didn't even know what we did, nor did I realize what we did for a number of years. And it's a global system integrator. It's a big one. And so, that I would say was very accidental. That said, once I got in, and I wouldn't say it was that angelic moment, but the aha for me and what I really gleaned onto very early was what tech and later automation can do for that human experience, for our employees, for our customers. We spend so much time at work, doing work, effort, we sacrifice that I was really passionate about companies that could do that. So continuously, I've been very conscious about where I take my next step in terms of roles and companies. And either at Nintex, our mission being to improve the way people work through process management and automation. And then from an HR perspective, just really a deep belief and therefore motivation that what is possible by having an engaged, valued group of people. And that has led me to elevating roles through HR. And I loved what Aarti said earlier is saying yes, but also being okay with doing it scared. And you're going to have that at some point in your life. And so that's really been kind of how I've been both accidentally into tech and into my domain, but also how I've made very conscious decisions about what I believe is important in what we do.
Absolutely. I think that was just a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about as well. And I think a good way to talk about it so that everybody in the room also has, what do you think is the key two top impediments for a woman in a technology role or women in automation? Nellie, I'll start with you and then.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure it's just automation or just tech, and I'm not sure, we're focused on females, but I think we should acknowledge some gender diversity and non-binary, and so I think there's a bigger thing to it. There's a bunch, and I'm sure some of my fellow panelists will touch on these, but I think two that stand out for me is looking at hiring for potential versus demonstrated experience, which some people may not have had access or opportunity to. And the other one that I won't spend a ton of time on, but not considering intersectionality. So yes, we're all female here, but there's a lot more to us than just our gender.
Great points. Kathleen, can I ask you what you think the two biggest impediments are for?
It's such a broad question. I'd like to think that there's not a conscious impediment, all right? But I think getting to what Nellie was saying, I think it was McKinsey or Deloitte, one of them put out a report a few years ago that say, women are hired based on experience, men are hired based on potential. And I could Google it and find that in a little bit. So just, recognizing that you need to look across the board. And, I don't think there's that strong muscle in corporations today. Okay. And so, that's why I love the partnership with HR, because that can be so transformative in an organization around this topic. And you need to have the leadership, and you need to have a platform, and you need to be able to push that message in a company. I actually, when I look at roles across a corporation right now, moving into this next era, I think some of the most critical things company, and this is a really broad statement, but across the board are going to sit with the HR function. So that's just one aside. I want to say that you got to give women more at-bats and all that kind of fun stuff, but that's across the board, and I could, frankly, I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but just look at the panel you just had. There wasn't a woman on that panel. Okay. And so, you're sitting there scratching your head saying, well, what is it? I just don't think people see it as an issue all the time. And you need to always have that step back and say, do we have diversity here, covered? And whether that's, a diverse slate for every job opening, or just the way you approach, everything that you're doing right now, even your account teams. Okay. So when you go into, your enterprise planning and you've got all men, or frankly, all women, okay, on different account teams, is that the right thing to do? So, I just think it's a different way of thinking.
Go ahead, Mary, please.
No, you just reminded me of, it was a story from my past, but I was in a board meeting at one of the companies I was a CMO in the past, and they were looking at our numbers, and HR had presented, or our chief people officer had presented our, numbers, and we were 24% female, and the board, who was all male, they went, yeah, that's right, that's about right. Because that's what they're used to seeing in technology companies. So that's about right. And I almost laughed off, well, it's not about right. Like, what percentage, even if you just look at engineers, I know, and you might know better than me, but I know that the percentage of graduates of engineering schools, there are more and more women engineers. Even if you're just looking, because we know there's sort of the pink ghetto of finance, legal, marketing, and HR that's just chock full of women, but so it's I think it's just expected, and you get what you expect, right? So there's the bar, and you made the bar, and yeah. So
that's a very interesting point, Mary, because research is showing that even if there are just 10% of women represented in the senior management of a team, all the men in the team believe that they're adequately represented.
Yes.
So this is enough research to show that 10%, and that is exactly to the point that you were sharing, that you just need that 10% for everybody to believe that everything is A-okay. And a great point, Kathleen, I think, where you talked about, we've also grouped everybody into an all-male and an all-female panel. Very well noted. It's okay. We're put on the spot. We make sure we're better every day. I'm 100% sure this is going to come on me after this. And I will. But that is.
Sorry, Nikita. It's not what I meant by any stretch.
No, but it is true. And I think we really need to be more conscious, more deliberate with every single thing that we do to make a difference there. Nancy, would love to hear your thoughts as well in terms of what you see being the two biggest impediments, at least as far as gender diversity in the workplace goes.
Right. Well, in technology specifically, again, I have to say today only 20% of the engineers coming out of the engineering schools are women, right? So we're just not getting them in enough. And that's gone from 15 to 20% over a 10-year period. Really, we're just not going fast enough. We also seem to define, to your point, that we define tech jobs as engineers. When indeed preparing yourself for a job in technology is a little different than preparing yourself for a job in retail. And so I think there's also there's an emphasis, I think, that has to occur in certain schools. The other thing is I think technology, particularly new technology, is a nonlinear world. And women have a tendency to live linear lives. We live them based on calendars generally generated by other people that force a linearity. And so until we figure out how to allow women to manage their lives in our environment, women will self-select out. They self-select into consulting firms. They self-select into industries that will allow them to conduct their lives in a way that is comfortable, and they and their families will thrive. And
we're in a way where they feel like they're set up for success, both personally and professionally. I mean, why the hell are you going to walk into something where you don't feel like you're going to have to, every word coming out of your mouth, you're going to have to fight? So, I mean, I totally appreciate that women self-select into other places.
Yes. But it's, so we have a couple of things that fight against women. One is the entire industrial age was designed by men for men to be successful. All of corporate America was designed around how men use their brains. Women use their brains differently. We are designed to function in the world. We hear it differently. We process it differently. We respond to it differently until we totally disabuse ourselves of all the practices of the industrial age. Women will remain to feel like strangers in a place that they must go in order to earn their living and make their careers. And so the entire process is set up to allow men to be successful and women to feel like strangers. And so this is why, by the way, I love automation. And the silver lining of COVID is that it has really accelerated the concept of not talking about the future of work, but still saying, I'm still going to pull you into an artificial pen, call you an employee, set up ridiculously artificial relationships, and measure you as though you are simply subservient to machines. And women particularly subservient to the machine. So, and obviously I have no enthusiasm about this topic. But yes, that's what I see as the impediment.
How do you really feel? Yeah.
Exactly.
Nancy, you bring a good point, and I think so did you, Kathleen, where you talked about having nonlinearity. What is very interesting is a lot of you started at one point and took a nonlinear path to get to where you are, right? Even this room, and that essentially goes to show these micro changes that you talked about, Aarti, right? Or the micro risks that one takes and continually strives for that non-linearity actually works in one's favor. So Aarti, would love to hear your thought process as well. I'm sure you resonate with a lot of this, but would love to hear.
I do. So I think two things I will say that are different than what Nancy and Kathleen and others are saying is, and I 100% agree with what they're saying. I feel like being in technology, right, day in, day out, being the only one in any technical meetings with all the guys surrounded, I feel like one of the main hurdles is if we have women like us in the role of power and influence, then we are going to be, we will have the voice at the table, right? We will be basically involved in, right now, as I think Nancy, you said, it's not woman friendly. We are strangers, right? So if we are at the top of the house and if we sit down with our colleagues and define the policy or define the strategy, then we will basically see more of us. And I think the second hurdle I see is us. I mean, I talk about myself. Many times I held myself, am I good enough? And I questioned myself. I know I was good enough, but I still questioned and doubted myself. So I think the second hurdle is, I think a lot of things have changed. So I'm 19 years in the industry, and I remember when I was young and naive and I had no clue about what is diversity and inclusion means. I was just doing a job and working very hard. And now when I see, I think at that point in time, talking about diversity was a taboo, right? You were not supposed to openly speak. And now we talk about very openly. So a lot of things have changed. And organizations have so many programs and support system around us, but we still don't see enough women, because I feel we need to self-reflect and don't doubt ourselves and goes back, take that chance, and you can lose, you can fail, but just take that chance and have that journey and experience. Because if we don't, we can have everything around us, but if I don't change myself, I'm still going to be stuck at that situation, right? So
these are great points. And there's a very interesting book. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's called How Women Rise by Marshall Goldsmith. It talks about many of the points that we are discussing here in terms of minimization, how women are better at building networks, but really poor at leveraging networks. And we have a lot of self-limiting behaviors where we take accountability for self. And Aarti, you brought in a really interesting point, and I want to extend that to Kathleen, because Kathleen, we talked about this as we were discussing the panel, right? You created a very interesting hashtag, which is hashtag the only one. In this case, we're many. We needed one representative male to say hashtag the only one in this case. But you are a senior leader, very often the only person at the table. And like Aarti said, and I think you also referred to it, very important for women in power to sort of set the benchmark, the goal, and also be the beacon or the lighthouse for the rest of the women who know, so that they know where they're going to go. How has this influenced your thinking, and what are you doing to be able to change that behavior and influence other people to be in roles like you are?
So, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I try not to think about it, because I do. And it's funny, I know Chris Huff is still on the call and he was on the formal panel, but, you know, a lot of the times I just look around and I'm like, how in this day and age, it is 2021, am I the only woman at the table? I thought this would have been passed years ago. And then I see my own daughter coming up through the ranks and know what lies ahead of her. So, you know, it is something I'm conscious of, and labels that get put on you. So, you know, I'm conscious of when I speak, how I speak, you know, particularly in a broad group. One man's passion and, you know, just complete, you know, excitement can be seen as emotional by a woman. And so, you know, you've got those unconscious biases working against you. I think at my role, it's about continuing to elevate this conversation when appropriate. Okay. I remember I was with a partner group. There was probably about 200 people jammed into this room. And some of them asked us, you know, the leaders of Kofax sitting on the dais, you know, what could they do, you know, to help us help them effectively. And I remember saying, you know, and it was all men. I mean, literally, there were probably me on the dais and 2 other women in the room. And I was just like, guys, have you ever thought about diversity? All right. And I still to this day, I'm not sure if it was appropriate or not, because it felt like a lead balloon. Like nobody said anything after that, but it was just weird for me, frankly. And so, so I joke about that hashtag because, I mean, I can't say it happens every day, but several times a week. And I know I'm not the only one. And then I think about my male friends. For them, it would be weird if it was flipped and they were constantly sitting down with just women. You know, and I just like, how would you be uncomfortable? Because, you know, for me, it's just normal, or at least it has to be normal for us to be productive. So I don't know. I don't know what else to say on that one.
So I think that's a great point, right? It has to be normal for it to be productive. It's almost like a forced situation. But the question that I'd ask to you, Kathleen, is how can one, you in the position that you are as well, be able to influence change so that it is not normal a few years down the line?
I mean, I just think it's kind of part of the tools that we carry around. It's constantly raising it as an issue, trying to, you know, I know personally, I will demand diverse slates across the board and really challenge my peers to do the same thing. Okay, because until you bring in, you know, where there's turnover, we're in an industry that's growing like crazy. We're all hiring. We're all trying to get talent. We're all challenged with getting that same talent. You know, so it's hard or easy, I think, sometimes for recruiters to sit there and say, well, there's no women. And I'm like, bull. Okay, it's not easy for you to go get them. Okay, but really challenge them to do that. Challenge in the org why we're not seeing more people, or what are the programs that we're putting in place. You know, I am very conscious of how I reflect on that. So, you know, and in doing so, try to coach other women as well. You know, I don't like to, you know, support the dysfunction that sometimes exists in corporations, but to get more women to the table, you almost have to, okay? And coach them so that they're as successful in this sort of org right now.
I'll just add one thing, Nitika. I think just going back to Kathleen's point, I think things would change also so I remember in one of my areas, my boss, who was the head of that department, he genuinely showed the need and the care to have diverse slate. So it's not just coming from the CEO or the CMO or HR, which is top of the house, but if you are doing a hiring exercise and if your boss is really very serious about this, I think the middle management would see that. And then they would basically also start thinking that this is important and we need to think differently, and just don't go to the managers and say there are no females, right? So I think that's very, the tone from our immediate management and the care is also very important.
That's a great point. You're talking about gender. Sorry, you were saying, Mary, but I've just summarized that, Aarti. You were just saying that you need gender champions, and it's really not about a woman being a champion. It could be anybody who's really a diversity champion or an inclusion champion, even if we have to go broader than gender itself. Mary, sorry, you were saying.
I was just going to say that I actually believe, it's absolutely necessary to have genuine commitment at the top of the organization, that you can start all sorts of programs and, have balloons and party. If the CEO and the executive team does not actually buy into it, I mean, I feel lucky and blessed to be where I am now because it's real. And the more real it is, the better and faster change happens. I also would like to say that I think women need to be really careful not to adopt the characteristics and traits of successful men when they become successful, because I see it all over the place. I see it in movies. We're just be a person, be somebody, be real, be accessible, talk like a person, and I think that actually, I know it does, because it inspires other women, and for me, I am accepted by, I was on a product call today, and I am a brand person, but I am not an imposter in that meeting. My point of view is listened to, and that's just that just feeds on itself, and that strengthens people. Confidence is the secret ingredient to success at anything. And that's why Aarti said, women are hired for their experience and men for their aptitude. But it's really, men have all sorts of, in many cases, unearned and unwarranted confidence and women have this imposter syndrome. And, I think just being a person and making other women feel like that's good is going to help us all.
I think those are really great points. And I think the thing of confidence, imposter syndrome, like you said, unearned and very often very hubris, if we want to call it that also in some cases. But you raised a good point. So it obviously needs to come from the top to really percolate across the organization. But they may be champions. But in order to make it a systemic and a programmatic approach for diversity, you need to really empower people across all levels to be involved in the process of inclusion. And Nellie, you have some great points of how you're doing it at Nintex. Would love to hear what you're doing and how you're empowering people across the board to be more inclusive going forward.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just touch on whether we call it that importance coming from the top, whether we call it, workplace advocacy or an ally. I'm going to use the word ally today. But I think when we start, that's a really very important role. And going back to what Mary said, first, fundamentally, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, this starts at the top being aligned to the business strategy. And I think that business case, I mean, Nitika, you rattled off some of the stats around innovation and meeting client needs earlier on. I think that's important. I think it's also important to not just talk about the diversity case, but the equity case, the inclusion case. And I also think it's really important to talk about it as it relates to human experience and the feelings of being left out and what that does to your brain that you bring to work every day. So I think that's really important. I would also say active commitment and visible involvement from the executive team and that top down I don't know if we'll get to it, but I actually think a lot of magic also happens at that line manager level, the teams, the representation of your managers. There's a ton of great work on internal networks and making sure that you either have representation there or that's where you start your ally work. And so those are a couple of things, that we're thinking about. One of our core tenets is to operate with respect and consideration. And I really dive into two words in there. One is operate. It's not just a superficial, limited interaction. It's really the systems, tools. It controls how we function. It helps us when our brains trick ourselves and go into bias. And so we look at things like really practical, just really simple examples like here are cue cards. When you run into a situation in which bias is occurring or disrespect is occurring, or how to practice recovering when you screw up someone's pronouns. I did it last week. But those are really practical things that we're starting to work out so that everybody can operate like an ally and not just for gender diversity.
Those are great points. And I think one of the things also to operate as an ally, and I think Kathleen, you brought that up, is the concept of bias. And often it is unconscious bias. You don't do it deliberately. You're just good people, but often you don't know what you're going to do. And that's what you raised, right, Nellie? Just those cue cards that will help people through the process. Nancy, I know you've been doing some things to remove bias from the process itself so that it helps across the organization in the way in which you hire and the way in which you promote people. And the good thing is you're using technology to do it. So would love to hear some things that you have done innovatively to be able to drive that agenda ahead.
So yeah, in the conscious of time, what we have tried to do is use automation as much as we can to make certain that bias, where you see processes that are ripe with bias, that we can pull it out. And one of those processes would be the traditional 9-box talent review. Everybody has seen this thing. It's the most subjective thing you can do, and yet people they live for it like it's a religion. So what we said is, what if we were to create a set of questions every manager had to ask? And we weighted those questions. And there's questions about relevance of the role, the performance of the individual in the role, the person's stickiness, how engaged do we think this person, and how well do they live our values? And so a lot of questions for each employee. And these are weighted even by function. Relevance maybe being more important in an engineering organization than it is maybe in HR per se. So, and then we ask the employees a bunch of questions about how they're doing, what they're enjoying, how they're thriving, what is not working for them. And we get kind of a stickiness score from that. We have hundreds of thousands of pieces of data. And we created a bot that then assigns the person based on the manager's questions, where the employee might end up on the 9-box grid. It's very interesting because there's no way to answer that many questions and sustain a bias, right? We uncover it, we see it. If it can't be sustained, which means we have a far more objective and truly reflective of a person's capabilities positioning on this 9-box grid. Then what happens, though, is all the things that the employee has told us about how they're thriving, what they're loving, and what isn't working for them. We have a series of interventions that we have programmed. So the bot serves up to the manager an individualized career development plan that says, here's what this employee, it really is thriving at. Please continue to do that. But here's areas where they see that maybe their career is not going well, or the relationship inside the company is not going well. And so here are a bunch of interventions you might try. Here's some questions you might ask. Here are things that you may want to do, whether it's giving them more visibility or certain development programs. The reason I'm so excited about this is because I would never have done this without automation. You would never collect this much data. It would have taken a human being 9 months and then by that point, it's irrelevant. So it's a process we designed because we had automation, not one that we automated. And it's entirely different, and it has really created just a magnificent tool around the customization of the engagement with employees. And so, yes, it has removed bias. It has created a far more robust relationship between the manager and the employee. And it has taken this a very traditional process and made certain that it did not put all the men in the upper right-hand box. Now, with that said, there's a lot that women have to learn. One of the things, as Mary was speaking, that I thought about is that in the 1980s, women came to work and tried to behave as men, and what they were then was really puny men, right? It just wasn't natural, and so and putting on that persona was terrible. What I noticed today, the great progress that I've seen is that young women, Nellie, Mary, Aarti, I have to include you, Kathleen, because I'm 20 years older than you. You all come to work as more integrated personalities. You're not putting something else on, right? You don't leave femininity at the door. And so what I see over the course of 40 years is a shift of how women come into work. They come in as more authentic. They're not trying. Now, we still all, and Kathleen mentioned it, I still am always the last to speak in the meeting. I drop my voice into the lower register so men can hear me well. I speak more slowly. And yes, I try not to get too exuberant. So in case some man's going to say, no, calm down, right? Because that's what they do. No, not in my current job, just over the past 39 years. But women have come in differently. And so the environment's changing, and we are no longer coming to work as puny men. We're now coming to work with all the attributes that women have. Women are more strategic than men, far more strategic than men. And I think the more we showcase it, that imposter syndrome, I know exactly what you mean. I experience it to this day. It's for, long as I've been sitting in this seat, I still experience it from time to time. And that's where we have to shift things. This past year, over 50% of our promotions to vice president were women. And so rather than go out and compete for CXOs, I've decided to grow my own. I mean, I can't think of anything better we could do right now than create an elite cadre of women who lead this company into the future. That's a
great point, Nancy. This interestingly, from Abby also said that 43% of their employees are women and 28% of their product development teams are made of female developers. So I think that's an interesting trend, and we're seeing it more and more in the automation space, which is extremely heartening to see. Before we end, I know this has been an incredibly interesting conversation, very compelling points of views, personal experiences, as well as very definitive recommendations to people and organizations as well on how to be better human beings, how to really bring the human aspect, it's not just about gender, diversity, inclusion, or any of those. It's really about being good human beings and people as well, and really understanding and accepting our authentic selves. I think we've talked about different elements, but as we end, I'd just love if you could give us a quick response. If you had one superpower to fill up this entire gender diversity conversation, Aarti, I'll start with you. What would that superpower be?
That was so funny question. I was thinking so much. So I would say I will go back in time and correct this problem that we have that originated this problem back then. And just do that. Just correct that problem. Go back in time and correct the problem.
Awesome. Great. Mary, what about you? What would your superpower be?
I think it would be to have all parents know how to raise really good people.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kathleen, what would your superpower be? And also one word of advice to women who are entering the automation field.
So I'll follow on Mary. I'd go one step further. My superpower would be to enable men to have children too. And so then a couple could pick who has the baby and which way they want to go. Okay. And I think for, women coming into the space, again, when you have a voice, use it. Okay. You have an opinion, use it. Don't ask for permission. Just put your thoughts out there. You're going to make mistakes, but guess what? That's life, and you recover and you get better for it.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you, Nellie. What about you?
I promise I didn't plan this, but I was going to say going back in time and how I am doing. I promise. But to Mary's point, how I do that starts in my home. And that's what I can control. I can control a lot here too, but it starts in my home. And then I think in terms of thinking about inspiring women know your thing, whether it's nerves, imposter syndrome, anxiety, working against bias, work-life balance, mental load. We all have it. And we actually should bring that in a little bit more. And so be very clear about what those are, but also be able to go scared. It's okay. Yeah. We're all scared in some way. Just go.
Absolutely. I think that's fabulous. And Nancy, what would your superpower be?
Kind of plays off, it plays off Nellie a little bit. Actually, I wish I could remove your fear. I wish I had the power to take people's fear of diversity and difference away, and be able to, because most of the bad things that happen in our world today are based on fear.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You know what, Nitika? I had this, and that exactly goes with what Nancy said.
Oh, fabulous. And then, ladies, I will end with this, which is how women, you can't see this in my screen, but it's how women rise. So it has been a pleasure speaking to all of you. And I think I'm feeling extremely positive, happy, great set of conversation. And I think lots of little nuggets of wisdom here, which I'm sure that people will benefit from. So thank you again for your time. And you've been a wonderful panel.
Thanks very
much. Over to you.
Nice to meet you all.
Lovely to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you.